She stood in the hallway staring wordlessly at the suitcases, the laptop case, his briefcase, piled up where she hadn't seen them when she walked in. She walked back into the den and looked at the man sitting in the shadows. "You are insane, Lyle. You are walking out on me and our two sons because of one fight. One stupid mistake I made while I was drunk a few hours ago. I didn't have it with anyone. I didn't betray you. You are certifiable." When he didn't answer, she started toward him, and again he held his hand up as if he were giving a stop sign. She halted. She wondered if he really might have had a breakdown. This man was not her husband, not the man she had lived with for 8 years. No one could change so drastically in a few hours. He had never been like this before, never. And the worst of it was, there really wasn't anything to explain it. Nothing much had happened at the party. She backed up but didn't sit down. "Can you tell me why? Can't you at least do that?" I had a moment of clarity. She heard the words but couldn't fit them into any kind of sense. A moment of clarity? Why do you do that, Lyle? I know you think you're smarter than I am, than anybody in my family, anybody around here. But why can't you avoid rubbing our noses in the fact that we're morons compared to you? Put it in words I can understand. The figure cloaked in shadow shifted his position, put his head forward slightly, and seemed to rest it on his joined fists. "I'm sorry, Diane. I really am. I don't mean to do that. It's just that's the way professors of English literature think and talk. It's not that hard to explain, actually. We, all of us, walk around never really seeing what our whole lives are all about. We're blinded by all the minutiae of our existences, waking up and brushing our teeth and going to work and paying bills and what's on TV tonight, and the kids having colds and wondering if we're getting fat or if our husbands or wives are looking at other people. We never step back and get a picture of where our lives are. Except, once in a rare while." He stopped and she stayed silent, hoping he would go on. "I had a moment of clarity earlier tonight." "You keep saying that, but what does it mean? What did you see?" Even though she could not see his face clearly, she knew he'd focused his glance laser-like on her face. She felt the force of his gaze on her skin. "I saw our life, Diane. I saw what we are, what we were, and what we've become. It had nothing to do, or very little, with what happened at the party. You're right, to walk out because of one fight, one mistake, one incident, would be crazy. That's not why I'm leaving. I'm leaving because I realized our marriage was a mistake, that I love you but you don't love me, that I have never and probably never will satisfy you the way you need to be satisfied, that you're a good woman deep down and you will never leave me because you honor your promises, and that we're too young to screw up each other's lives for the next 40 or 50 years. That's why I'm leaving when we finish our conversation." About 3 hours earlier, I pulled into my driveway at 9:30 p.m. My cell phone remained silent. It had been silent since I left Rivers Trailer Park south of Palatka at 8 p.m. Left my wife and about 75 of her close and extended family members and friends drinking and dancing at a monthly party that had been a tradition for almost the entire 8 years of our marriage. We lived in Jacksonville, a 1 million-person Northeast Florida urban center about an hour and a half north of Palatka. The house was dark except for the automatic yard light with an electric eye sensor that illuminated the front driveway as I walked up the front walkway, or rather limped. It had been a raucous evening, and I was feeling a lot older than my chronological age of 34, more like 74. But I only had to lug a 6-pack of Michelob Lights into the house, so I made it. I flipped the kitchen lights on and sat down at the table where we actually ate most of our meals instead of the little dining nook, which was where we were supposed to eat. I screwed the top off one Michelob and took a long swig of the deliciously cold drink and let it slide down my throat. Then another. All the while waiting for the first ringtone from my cell phone. Nothing. I looked at the pictures that 5-year-old Billy had drawn at school in crayon magnetized to the front door of the fridge and a photo of 7-year-old David catching his first pass at a Pop Warner Pee Wee football game. I felt a little catch in my throat, and I consciously fought to avoid tearing up as I looked at David's dark-haired young body caught in the act of his first athletic triumph. He looked like his mother, with her dark hair and lithe frame. Both the boys had their mother's dark hair instead of my sandy blonde, and both boys had their mother's light brown eyes instead of my blue ice chips. I fought down the lump in my throat. They and their mother had been my world. Until a few hours ago. I was about to lose them all, and it was like standing on railroad track in the dark of night, watching an oncoming train and being frozen to the track. I took another swallow and rested my head for a moment against the dark-grained wood of the table. I finished off the bottle and made myself get up from the table. Sooner or later the phone would ring, and then eventually the front door would open, and I had things to do before that happened. I walked up to the second floor in the bedroom that Diane and I had shared for 5 years since we had moved into this fairly expensive Mandarin neighborhood. We moved there because it had pretty good schools. I taught an introductory English literature class at Jacksonville University, a small private liberal arts college across town, but I liked the Mandarin neighborhood better for the boys than the area around JU, so I put up with the hour-long daily commute. I opened the closet door and in the back found the 2 suitcases Diane and I had used for our last cruise 2 years ago to the Bahamas. Then I started opening the drawers and taking out as much of my underwear as I could find. I took a week's worth of slacks, shirts, and suit coats out. I had to remember to pack a razor, toothbrush, toothpaste, a few medications, all the things I'd need for a trip away from home. I leaned over the dresser and felt the urge to vomit. I fought it back. Only this trip was never going to end. It was an exile from everything I loved, or had loved, and I was never going to come back. If I let myself think about it too much, I knew I'd freeze up. So I very methodically went about packing up everything I'd need to start life over as a single man after 8 years of marriage. I found my laptop and a briefcase with work I'd need for the college. I ferried everything down to the hallway that led to the dining room to the left of the front door. They wouldn't be seen by anyone walking into the house unless they actually walked into the dining room. When I had gotten everything I could think of, I took the Michelob 6-pack with 5 beers left in it and went into the den. The front door opened to a hallway which led to the right and then to the den. I sat down in the easy chair at the far end of the den and placed the Michelobs on a glass coffee table in front of me. There was a floor lamp behind the easy chair, and I left it off. There was a light in the hallway that anyone walking in would flick on. I stood on a chair and loosened the light bulb in the center of the den so that it wouldn't come on when you hit the light switch at the entrance to the den. With everything prepared, I leaned back in the easy chair in the darkness of what had been my home and opened the second Michelob and began to take careful sips. About 11 p.m. the cell phone rang the first time. The flip-top Nokia screen lit up in the darkness and I recognized Diane's cell phone number. I didn't answer it. About 3 minutes later it beeped that I had a message waiting. I didn't retrieve it. 5 minutes after that it rang again, and then in another 3 minutes, in another 5 and 10 and then 5. Diane called in her father, Richard, and her older brother Dave and her younger sister Kelly, and then Diane again. If there had been any humor left in the world, the parade of phone numbers would have struck me as funny. But funny had died a few hours ago, and I didn't think I'd find anything funny again for a long time, if ever. The house phone rang, and the cell phone and then the house phone. I just finished the second Michelob and started on the third. Time crawled by and like the traitor it was, refused to run backwards so that the day that destroyed my life would unwind and give me a second chance. But even as I expressed that common human wish, I knew inside that what had happened had been coming for longer than one day, and I'd have to unwind time back at least 8 years to undo the damage, and that wasn't going to happen. It was a cool November, but not bad. The RV park and cabins near Lake Como south of Palatka were usually almost deserted this time of year. So it was a good place for Richard Carter and his clan and friends to hold their monthly dance/get-together/parties in a quiet place where no one would complain about noise or call the cops and people could relax. Carter and his wife Ricky had raised a brood of 9 boys and girls, 8 still surviving, and when all the kids got together along with other family members like uncles and aunts and friends, there was usually a crowd of 100 or more adults. Richard and Ricky had built a road paving/asphalt company that made them millionaires by the time they'd reached their late 60s, and they enjoyed hosting the Saturday monthly parties. There was always Southern rock, and fried chicken and ribs and oysters in season, and plenty of beer and hard liquor for anybody's tastes. Diane and I didn't make it every month, but we tried to get there as often as possible. Richard and Ricky had done their best to welcome a Yankee stranger from the foreign land of Massachusetts into their family, even though I knew there were times they had a hard time understanding me and the way I made my living. I didn't sell cars or repair them or build houses or lay down parking lots or make money in any of the ways that everybody else in their group did. I stood in front of bored young men and women and talked about poetry and novels and essays and stuff that most of the Carter clan understood little and cared about less. The drinking usually started about noon. Cabins were available for anyone who needed them to sleep off too much booze, as well as a few RVs. Diane and I had sent the boys to a friend's house whose parents we trusted. They knew we might be back tonight or Sunday morning. We watched their kids when they needed us. There was an old concrete dance pavilion that was only used basically when the Carter parties were held and a loudspeaker was set up. We ate and drank a little bit while people drifted in and started drinking. By 5 p.m. it was dusk, and the music got louder, and the drinking got more intense. Diane walked around talking to people while I stood by one of the tables still laden with food and ate a few grapes. In the twilight, she glimmered like a ghost in a light white dress that clung to her hips. Her hair was long and swung behind her, and I don't think I've ever seen a more beautiful woman. Sometimes I just watch her for hours at these parties because dancing and drinking are not my things. Just watch her and marvel that an outsider had been able to come in and steal her away from a horde of horny southern suitors who wanted that body and face in their beds. As usual, drinking and dancing and luscious women and horny men didn't make for the most peaceful mix. One of Sister Kelly's old beaux got her out dancing to a particularly snaky tune and was able to dry hump her in front of everybody until her husband Billy stalked out there and laid him out with a thunderous right cross. Cooler heads prevailed. Beer flowed, and before a few minutes passed, the two men had shook hands. The old beau got a kiss from his old sweetheart, and Billy and Kelly were wandering off looking for a dark spot to do the dirty deed, which they usually did at every party. The pavilion started to get crowded, with even Richard and Ricky moving to the beat of some southern rock when I noticed I'd lost track of Diane. When I spotted her, my stomach tightened. She was dancing a slow dance with a tall, dark-haired man in a calico shirt and jeans. She had melted into his arms, and I could see his big hands sliding up and down her back, almost down over her ass, although I saw her move his hands off when they got too low. Bobby Trescott had been one of the guys chasing her before I showed up at the insurance officer where she was working to transfer my auto insurance to her company. For some reason, she seemed to take a liking to the stranger with the even stranger accent, and 6 months later we were married. Bobby had never taken her decision well. He still called and came by sometimes, and Diane insisted on viewing him as a friend rather than an ex-boyfriend. At these parties, he always wound up dancing inappropriately close, touching place he shouldn't touch, and usually make some smartest comments to and about me, to the general amusement of many. I made my way through the twilight toward the two of them, watching the way they moved together. I couldn't help but be jealous. Diane had been drinking, not enough to be drunk, but enough to be relaxed and kind of melt against him. I got close enough and said loud enough for them to hear, "Hi, Bobby. Mind if I cut in?" Diane looked at me with no guilt and smiled lazily. "Hi, baby. I was just dancing a little with old Bobby. I promised him this dance. It's the dance from our prom. You don't mind if I finish it with him, do you?" Bobby grinned at me, and so I could see it, slipped his left hand up and under her blouse to cup her chest. Because of the twilight, only the three of us could see what he was doing. Diane gave him a funny look and then looked at me. I tried to read her expression. Was she angry at him for what he was doing, or me for letting him? I tried to be cool, but it slipped away from me. "Bobby, get your hand off my wife's chest." His smile grew wider. "Or what, Lyle? Jesus Christ. What kind of man's name is Lyle? That sounds like a little girl." "Hey, Lyle, that is so damned." I hesitated. I hadn't been in a fistfight in 20 years. "I don't care what you think about my name. Get your hands off my wife." Diane took her hand and pushed his hand so he released her. "All right, Bobby, cool it. Why do you always have to be in a hole around Lyle? He's my husband. He's not a roughhouser like you. You are always trying to get him into a fight because you know you'd kick his ass. It's not fair. And Lyle, I'm not some little girl. Bobby is a little drunk, but I can handle him. I've known him most of my life. You don't need to come out here making a scene trying to rescue me. Hell, I'd probably have to rescue you." I couldn't believe my ears. I knew now that several of the couples around us had heard the exchange, and I heard snickering. "What the hell did you just say?" Her eyes widened, and I wondered if she had even thought about what she had said. "Oh, Lyle, I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean it that way. How the hell could you mean that?" Bobby pushed her to one side. "She meant that if you get in my face, I'll kick your ass and smash your face in, you damn geek. The only reason I haven't done it before is that she keeps begging me not to hurt you. What kind of man hides behind his wife's skirts? I couldn't resist. Somebody that can count beyond 10 without using his fingers, you redneck moron. Somebody that came in and took your girl away from you without working up a sweat. Somebody who made 2 babies with her. Something I'm not even sure you could do, or if you have the equipment for. I saw the swing coming even as I sensed people coming up from behind us. I was moving to get out of the way when my foot slipped on what was probably somebody's spilled drink. I went down on my ass and hit my head on the concrete landing. Diane's brother Dave and a friend of his got to Bobby and grabbed him by both arms. I hit hard and it knocked the wind out of me. I was stunned for a moment. Bobby didn't try to shake off the guys holding his arms, probably feeling he'd gotten the best of the exchange. As to who's got the better equipment, well, why don't you ask Diane sometime? She used to think my equipment was pretty goddamn good. She told me one time that Pencil D is a good name for you. Richard Carter came up behind us then and said in a hard voice, "All right, Bobby, enough. We let you come to these parties because you're an old friend, but you're over the line. Get out of here." I looked up then at Bobby's grinning face and glanced around at other faces around me. I could see the smiles, or the desperate attempts not to smile. And then I looked at my beloved wife's serious face, and I knew she was another one fighting it. She thought it was funny, and as I looked at her, she deliberately turned her face away, toward her father. "Daddy, no. Bobby was just drinking. He didn't mean anything by it. You know he and Lyle are fussing, but it doesn't mean anything. And anyway, I did promise him that dance." Even Richard Carter looked at his daughter in disbelief. "You are sure that's what you want, Diane? After what Bobby said about your husband?" She looked back at me, without smiling. "Lyle is a grown man, Daddy. If he's upset by anything Bobby does, he knows what he can do about it. Don't you, baby?" I got my hands under me and got to my feet. I just turned around and walked away from my wife. Bobby started laughing. I heard snickering and I wanted desperately to believe that Diane wasn't among them, but I wasn't about to turn around to see for sure. As I walked off the dance landing, Richard caught up to me and talked as I walked away. "Son, I know you're pissed right now, but listen to me. I know Diane loves you, whether you believe it now or not. But women, listen. Sometimes a woman, even the best woman, wants to know her man will fight for her. They may not do it up where you come from, but down here, a woman won't respect a man who backs down from another man trying to move in on her. You do what you think is right, but even if Bobby beats the crap out of you, at least fighting him will show her that you care enough to fight for her." I kept walking. "You're right, Richard. Women don't do that where I come from. A good woman doesn't give some sniffing hound encouragement to get into a situation where her husband has to fight for her. Not if they love their husband. Not if they've got a real marriage going. Now I'm not so sure of either." He grabbed my arm, and I had enough respect for him not to jay away. Maybe you're right about her lack of respect for you. I'm just her daddy. I can't get in the middle of this, but I can tell you she loves you. Don't do anything stupid right now. Just get somewhere and have a drink and cool down. This will all work itself out." Maybe. And then I did walk away from him. The driveway lit up with the lights of a car pulling into our driveway at 12:45 a.m. I was down to 1.5 Michelobs and I was feeling fairly mellow. I heard car doors open and voices. I had opened the window next to the easy chair, although it made the house chilly. But when people parked because of the way the driveway slanted, unless they were whispering, it was like they were standing next to the window, and I could usually hear every word. "He's here." It was Big Brother Dave. Thank God. The son of A.B. He's a sorry bastard. Cool it. I know you're sober now. After showing your ass that way, just be glad he's here and not off screwing some random piece of tail, the way most guys would. You shut up. He's my husband. A big F baby that walks away when his feelings get hurt and leaves his wife. What kind of husband does that? The kind whose wife is rubbing her all over an ex-boyfriend right in front of him. You dumb bee. If you weren't my sister and you didn't have those boys, I'd tell him to just dump your ass and go out and find somebody who wouldn't humiliate him in public. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Diane had always been a good little church-going Southern girl. Damn and heck were the strongest words I'd ever heard her use, even in bed. Now she was saying F? It had indeed been one hell of a night. The front door opened, they walked in. A moment later, the hallway light flipped on and light invaded the den. But it only reached the center of the den. I sat in darkness. Dave walked into the den first, Diane on his heels. He looked around and saw my shape sitting in the shadows in the easy chair. He just looked at me for a moment and then said, "Hi, Lyle." "Hello, Dave." There was what seemed like an interminable silence. I wasn't going to be the first to speak to her. Finally, she said, "Lyle." "Diane," I said in the same flat, emotionless tone. "Are you all right?" Dave asked. "Fine, thanks for asking." "You bastard." She blurted it out as if a cork had popped and she couldn't contain herself any longer. "I love you too, B." She tensed, and if Dave hadn't held his arm out, I think she might have launched herself at me. Her hair was wild, her face flushed, lipstick long gone. The white dress had blood on it, blood, and was creased, and there were dirt spots on it. It must indeed have been a hell of a party after I left. Smartass, always some smart crack. You think it was funny leaving me alone, not telling anyone where you were going, just vanishing? What kind of man does that? I don't know. Probably some pencil D coward too frightened to fight a man who was rubbing his wife's with her permission in front of all their friends and family. She had the decency to flush while Dave gave her a dirty look. "You had us worried, man," Dave said. "Why didn't you answer your phone? Any of your phones?" "I didn't feel like talking to anybody." He rubbed his chin and looked from Diane to me. I guess I'll leave you guys to talk then. It's been a long night, a hell of a night. I'm getting too old for this crap. You sure you're okay, Lyle?" "I was just being polite, Dave. I'm not all right. I don't know that I ever will be again. But it's not your problem. Thanks for getting Diane home. If it had been up to me, she could have gone home with Bobby or set up camping at the RV park." He gave both of us another look and then just shook his head. Then he looked over at Diane. "I'll leave then, Lyle. Let you guys work things out. Diane, walk me out, okay?" From their voices, I could tell they were standing by his Chevy Tahoe. Goddamn him, Dave. He's such in a hole. Any other guy would have waded into Bobby or gotten drunk or done something human. He walks off and sulks at home. He's not Dash. I would have kicked Bobby's ass, and so would Tommy and most of the guys we know. Lal isn't like that. He's not a fighter. You knew that when you decided to go after him. You remember. I remember very well. You said he wasn't one of those guys who'd come home with grease under their fingers, give you 6 or 7 kids, get drunk every weekend and screw around on you when you put on a few pounds. You said, and I quote, "He's a man who's going to go places. He'll provide for me and our children and be faithful to me and give us a good life. He's a good man." You wanted something better and you got it, and now you're getting antsy and doing that dance that means if Bobby isn't getting any, he probably will be. I used to be proud of you, Diane, but now I'm wondering if you're not just another hot pantsass that's going to wind up divorced 4 or 5 times, dragging new boyfriends home every few weeks and making mom and dad cry when they think about the mess you've made out of your life. Oh, Dave, grow up. I'm not stupid. I was feeling antsy, maybe horny, but I'm not 17. I was playing with Bobby because it felt good for one night to feel like a teenager again. My husband should have grabbed me and made me behave, but I forgot who I'm married to. He's pissed right now, but he'll get over it. It was one night and one fight. I'll go in there and give him some loving and this will all pass. People don't break up because of one fight. You damn well better, sister. You think because I build houses that I don't know anything about your dear husband. I have clients and partners whose kids go to JU. They talk about Lyle. He's young and he's got his hair and he's smart, and a lot of those co-eds think he's cute. There have been times he'd have gotten laid for an A or even a C. And there were female professors. One, well, let's just say she was so open about chasing him that the dean had to tell her to cool it, or they'd have to take action. So you go in there and blow him, or do whatever you got to do. You lose him, and he won't be sitting and crying into his beer for long. She came back in and stood at the entrance to the den for another long moment. Neither of us said anything. Then she started to cross the den toward me. I held my hand up. Stop. Grab a chair and sit over there by the TV. It surprised her. I could read it on her face. She was expecting to come over, kneel at my feet, cuddle for a moment, and then started the kissing which would lead to the bedroom. But it wasn't going to happen. She took a deep breath. I know I acted like a complete S out there tonight. You don't need to read me the riot act. Everybody else already has. Jesus Christ, Everybody acts like you're blood and I'm the outsider. But I was drinking, you know that. And Bobby, you know Bobby and I have a history. We go way back. We met in elementary, would you believe? And you have to know this, he's still in love with me. He never got over me choosing you as my husband. I know it's not right, but I feel sorry for him. So sorry sometimes. So you're going to ease his pain by F him? Anger flared in her eyes. He's hurting. A little flirting makes him feel better. Nothing else was going to happen. Until you came in like a big man and got things rolling. You didn't need to. He's a friend. You're my husband, the man I love. After another moment, she sat in a straight back chair. It wasn't the most comfortable in the world, which was what I wanted. Not to change the subject, Diane, but I'm curious about something. I left the campground about 8. My phone didn't start ringing until 11. I know the campground is a big place and a lot of stuff was going on, but after that little incident, it took you 3 hours to realize I was nowhere to be found? You must really have been feeling guilty about what happened to realize I'd vanished in only 3 hours. I guess if we hadn't had that little set to, you wouldn't have realized I was missing until the next morning. That tells me how important I am in your life. Anger flared in her eyes, and she was about to say something when she thought of something and stopped. My God, Lyle, you don't know, do you? Know what? All hell broke loose after you left. I did forget about you. Everybody did for a little while, but it doesn't mean I don't care for you. It's just, enough, what happened? Afterwards, Bobby and I danced for a little while. I know I shouldn't have, but I was so damned pissed at you. I know you don't fight. But God, this makes me sound like I'm 13. But I was hurt that you didn't at least take a swing at Bobby. If he'd put down you, I'd have been all over you, loving and comforting you. I wanted to. You're my husband. But you walked away. So yeah, I was pissed. I danced with him. And you know Bobby, he was drinking. So after a few minutes he went off to pee. Knowing Bobby, I figured he'd either go to the lake or behind one of the cabins. I got to talking with some people and didn't think anything more about Bobby for a while. After about a half hour, I started to wonder where he'd gone. I wasn't worried about you because you usually wander off and we don't reconnect until later in the evening. Then I heard a scream and everybody started running toward the lake. People were crowded around someone lying on the ground. I tried to get closer and then I realized it was Bobby. It was terrible. His face was covered with blood. They told me his arm was broken and he had some fingers broken as well. Dave and some of the others were talking to him, and I heard them say somebody had to call the sheriff. 3 biker types had gotten in Bobby's face, saying stuff about the old fart party messing up their party. When they got to arguing, all 3 of them started in on Bobby. He said a few of them would be limping and hurting for a while, but there were too many of them. Everything got hectic then. We called rescue for Bobby and the sheriff's office sent 3 cruisers, and they were checking the park for see if the bikers were still there or if anybody else was there. And then after a while, people started checking to make sure that everybody was accounted for. I took in what she had told me, and an obvious question occurred to me. Still, it took you 3 hours total, and sometime after you knew there were some bad bikers wandering the park to wonder where your beloved husband went? I repeat, I must really rank high on your list of important people. She bit her lip and wouldn't look at me. It dawned on me. You weren't at the park, were you? You went with Bobby to the hospital. You had to hold his hand, didn't you? She finally looked at me. He was beat up so damned bad, Lyle. He was hurting, and he asked me if I would ride with him. I couldn't say. No, could you? That seems to be a pattern developing here. You just can't say no to Bobby. Don't do this, Lyle. It was a decent, human thing to do. If you weren't so mad at me, you'd know that. Of course, he was an old friend. An old friend you used to F before I came along. You had to be there for him in his time of need. You did F him back then, didn't you? She looked down at the floor, shook her head, and then met my eyes again. Yes, Lyle. You knew that. We were serious back then, and I wasn't any little girl. We used to F. Does that make you feel better? And before you ask, he was good. Very good. Does that make me AS? How about you? I know damn well you weren't AV when we married. Should I be jealous of every woman you were ever with before me? No, that was then. This is now. Yeah. He asked me to ride with him, and I did. I held his hand, the one that they hadn't broken the fingers on. There was an ER tech in there with us, and there were people around us every second we were in the ER in Palaca where they were patching him up. Nothing happened, Lyle, and even if we were alone, messing with me was the last thing on his mind. You have nothing to be jealous of. Did I say I was jealous? You don't have to. I see it in your face every time he's near me. I guess I can't blame you. If you were always with another woman I knew you'd been with, it would eat at me. Did you ever think about me? She lowered her eyes again and wouldn't look me in the eye. Lyle, you know that's not a fair question. So much was going on. Bobby was hurt. Everybody was calling everybody else. So the answer is no. When did, and who did eventually start to wondering about me? She continued to look at the floor. They treated Bobby and his brother showed up to get him home. I went back to the campground with Kelly and Billy. When I got there, Daddy came up to me and asked me if I'd seen you since. That's wonderful, Diane. Your father thinks enough of me to remember I'd gone missing before my wife did. She looked up at me and I could see tears glistening in her eyes. Keep it up, Lyle. I screwed up and you're going to hurt me as bad as you can for what I did. Good one. I feel just a little bit shittier now. Sorry. I guess a guilty conscience hurts, doesn't it? It's hard for me to tell because I haven't been screwing around on you. She just looked at me and dropped her gaze to the floor again. We were both silent for a moment. Well, at least we got the air cleared, honey. She looked at me with a puzzled expression on her face. What? I stayed here because I wanted to have a chance to talk to you before I leave. Leave? Where are you going? You're not still pissed off at me, are you? I took in the sight of her, dirty, disheveled, blood on the white dress, and thought I'd never seen anything so beautiful before. And I never would again. I've got to run an errand, something I put off until I had a chance to talk to you. Then I'm going to find a place to spend the night. Some cheap motel, and Monday I'll be arranging a permanent place to stay and meeting with an attorney. A place to spend the night? Attorney? Lyle, are you crazy? What are you talking about? We just had a fight? A bad one. But I love you. People don't split because of one fight. What happened to you, Lyle? We were happy this morning. What could have happened in less than 24 hours to make you want to leave me? I didn't answer her, just pointed beyond her to the hallway leading to the kids' bedrooms. Go, I said. She got up slowly and walked into the other room. I knew she'd see the suitcases, the laptop, my briefcase. She walked back into the den ever more slowly, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe what she'd seen. You are insane, Lyle. You are walking out on me and our two sons because of one fight. One stupid mistake I made while I was drunk a few hours ago. I didn't have it with anyone. I didn't betray you. You were certifiable. When I didn't answer, she started toward me, and I held my hand up again to stop her. She backed up but didn't sit down. Can you tell me why? Can't you at least do that? I had a moment of clarity. I could see she had no idea what I was talking about. A moment of clarity? Why do you do that, Kyle? I know you think you're smarter than I am, than anybody in my family, anybody around here. But why can't you avoid rubbing our noses in the fact that we're morons compared to you? Put it in words I can understand. She was right. I did take my intellectual superiority to Diane and her family too much for granted. I hadn't ever realized how much of a hole I was simply because I worked with my head instead of my hands and had gone far beyond anywhere Diane's family had in their education. I'm sorry, Diane. I really am. I don't mean to do that. It's just that's the way professors of English literature think and talk. It's not that hard to explain, actually. We, all of us, walk around never really seeing what our whole lives are all about. We're blinded by all the minutiae of our existences, waking up and brushing our teeth and going to work and paying bills and what's on TV tonight, and the kids having colds and wondering if we're getting fat or if our husbands or wives are looking at other people. We never step back and get a picture of where our lives are. Except, once in a rare while. I stopped for a moment, then added, I had a moment of clarity earlier tonight. You keep saying that, but what does it mean? What did you see? I had to force the words out. It was the hardest speech I'd ever made, would ever make, because I knew that I was killing our life together, killing my life with the two boys I loved more than life itself. But she deserved to know why I was leaving. I saw our life, Diane. I saw what we are, what we were, and what we've become. It had nothing to do, or very little, with what happened at the party. You're right, to walk out because of one fight, one mistake, one incident would be crazy. That's not why I'm leaving. I'm leaving because I realized our marriage was a mistake, that I love you but you don't love me, that I have never and probably never will satisfy you the way you need to be satisfied, that you're a good woman deep down and you will never leave me because you honor your promises, and that we're too young to screw up each other's lives for the next 40 or 50 years. That's why I'm leaving when we finish our conversation. She shook her head again, and this time the tears did flow. I knew she was crying for a life that was ending, just like I was. The fact that she didn't love me the way I loved her didn't mean there was no love there. Just not enough. How can you say those things, Lyle? How can you be that cruel? Look at me, Diane. Answer me 2 questions, and if I'm wrong, I'll rethink what I just said. A look of fear crossed her face, and I knew that somehow she knew what I was going to ask her. Have you ever cheated on me, baby? Have you been with another man since we married? She was mute. The look on her face answered the question. Thanks, that's one of the reasons I love you. You could have lied, or tried half-truths, but you're too good a woman. You can't lie, and you won't tell me the truth you know will break my heart. But we both know the answer to that. You just answered. Silence is eloquent. And the second question, are you in love with me, Diane? I love you, Lyle. How the hell can you ask me that? No matter what, you have to know I love you. That wasn't the question I asked, Diane. Are you in love with me? I don't understand. You love your father and your mother and our boys and your brothers and sisters. I know you'd give your life for them. But being in love is different. It's having your breath catch in your throat when you look at a man, that makes your heart beat faster, that makes you when he kisses the side of your throat and rubs your chest, that you dream about and want when he's not around. It's the way I feel about you. I don't know if you felt like that about me when we were married, but I know you don't feel that way now. You'd make a good sister to me, but you're not a wife. Is that it? She stood up and started toward me. Is this all about it, Lyle? Is that what it's really all about? You're sorry because I'm not some sort of S in bed with you. I know I don't finish much, but I love it with you. It doesn't have to be all rockets and fireworks. It can be quiet and good too. I got up and walked into the light to meet her. As I entered the light, the breath caught in her throat and she staggered backwards. Oh my God, she gasped. You've never screamed for me, Diane. You know that? You've never screamed your head off while with me like you have for someone else. You just lay there and let me do my thing. You honestly think I can't tell how bored you are with my lovemaking? She stopped backing up and reached out with one shaking hand and tenderly touched one side of my face, the fingers gingerly feeling the swollen flesh that's surrounded by a nearly shut left eye. I knew the rest of my face consisted of various shades of yellow, red, and brown. My lips were swollen except for a chunk missing from the left side. Oh my God. They found you and beat you too. Why didn't you go to the hospital and get some medical help? I tried to smile, and that in itself must have been scary as hell, judging from the expression on Diane's face. You ought to see the other guy. I saw from the expression that slowly dawned on her face that she was realizing what my face meant. I stood in the darkness toward the lake side of the RV park, listening to the music, imagining I still heard wisps of laughter from the people around Diane and Bobby. I didn't have to go back to know she was dancing with him. I could have gone back and faced down Bobby. I'd been beaten up before, back in the days when I'd run the streets of South Boston as a wild, fatherless kid. Been beaten up a lot as an undersized shrimp trying to stay with 16 and 17-year-olds before my mother finally wised up and moved us to a small town south of Boston and away from gangs. I didn't mind the beating, if it came to that, and it probably would, because I didn't fool myself that I could take him in a fair fight. He was bigger and stronger and undoubtedly tougher than a guy who made his living standing in a classroom running his mouth. But it was the look in her eyes as she dared me to do something about Bobby's insults, the way she had let him hold her and rub her down, the easy, familiar way his hands had roamed over her. I think I'd always known, but now I couldn't make myself ignore the truth that he was her. Sometime, somewhere, another man had the center of my life all to himself, and she was sharing with him things that she would never share with me. How do you have a life when it's built on a lie? I leaned against a tree and stared up at the cloudy night sky and wondered how you turned around a life that had gone off track somewhere back and make it right again. How do you forgive a woman who is your entire life when she's giving her body and probably her love to another man? I wondered if they laughed about me when they were together. Had she really called me a pencil D? Was I that small, or was he that huge? I didn't think I was tiny down there. At least I'd never gotten any complaints. I heard the stumbling of a body crashing through weeds and bouncing off trees as somebody staggered toward the lake. Coming to a stop about a dozen feet away from me, facing the dark lake, he never even looked back at me but unzipped and let a stream go. I heard the piss hitting the leaves of bushes in front of him. Even from the rear I knew who it was. I didn't intend to do anything. Pounding on people was the whole way. It never really solved anything. So I was surprised as hell as he gave his D one last shake and tucked it in, turning to go back, to find myself hitting him in the side of the face with everything I had on the run so it had even more force behind the blow. He spun and fell without a word, only groaning as he hit the ground. Before he could get himself up on his hands, I kicked him as hard as I could in the stomach, lifting his whole body. This time he grunted hard. I tried again to kick him but this time he turned enough to catch the kick on a thigh and grabbed my foot as I was drawing it back and threw me away from him. Off balance, I fell backwards. By the time I was up on my elbows staring through the dark night, he was up on his hands and knees. He touched his forehead with a finger, and I saw something dark and shiny. I tore the flesh with my glancing punch, probably with the college ring on my right hand that had 2 diamonds held in place with small prongs. I'll be damned, Lyle. I didn't think you had it in you, you P. Of course, you had to sneak up on me, but at least you had the balls to try to hit me. But now I'm going to hurt you bad, real bad, boy. And I'll be in the right, 'cause I'll tell everyone, including Diane, how US punched me. I was trying to get up when he launched himself at me. I went down under his bigger, heavier body, trying to wriggle myself free. Lifting himself a little, he raised his fist. I didn't even see it hit, but it did hurt like hell. It felt like somebody had hit the side of my head with a metal gong. There was a ringing in my ears and the vision in that I went black for an instant. Then something smashed into my nose and blood was everywhere, and I couldn't breathe for an instant. Before I could recover from that, the world exploded again, and I couldn't see anything. I wondered if he had blinded me, but pushing him off for a second, I realized it was just a flow of blood into both eyes, blinding for a moment. I was able to move my head just enough, and I was never really sure how I ever knew to move it, so that his next punch sailed past me, and he lost his balance and went over. I scrambled to my feet, and as he rose to his knees, I smashed his face with bottom of my shoe and reveled in the sight of the spray of blood as I felt his nose and cartilage crunch under my heel. He fell backwards, grunting and making sounds that weren't words. I tried to kick him again, but somehow he avoided the thrust and buried his big fist deep in my gut and then pushed me off and away. I fell backwards, gasping for air. Every time I breathed, it felt like something sharp was trying to push its way out of my chest. The bastard had broken my ribs. He rolled backwards and came up on hands and knees. In the darkness, his ruined nose and grunting reminded of a dangerous wild boar that I'd gone hunting with Richard Clark one day early in my marriage. Sort of a bonding experience, I guess. The look in his eyes wasn't human, and now I started to get scared. He wasn't just going to hurt me. I think he'd lost it, and he'd kill me if he could. I had to get up because I couldn't let him take me down again. I knew if he got me down this time, he'd pound me to death using his superior weight and strength. I didn't know I could do it, but as he lunged at me, I managed to lurch up and out of the way. He came down his hands and knees again, bracing himself on his left hand, his right arm out trying to catch his balance. I didn't think, I just reacted. I think I must have seen the move on some martial arts or UFC match sometime. I grabbed his right arm, held it out and came down on his back elbow and upper arms with both knees and all my weight. I heard and felt something, maybe something's, snap, and he screamed. He rolled to and fro trying to shake me off, but I held on like a bull terrier, tugging and jerking at the damned arm over and over. He finally went onto his back, and before he tried to kick me off, I came down with both knees on his elbow and upper arm from the other side this time. He tried to scream, but it was choked off as if he couldn't breathe. I kicked the elbow again, and then just leaned on it with all my weight and kept it there while he wriggled like a fish trying to get off a hook. Finally, I let it go and fell backward. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. He held the arm to himself and just rolled back and forth on his back in the grass. He was gasping and crying. I probably should have felt worse about what I had done to him, but the bastard had stolen my wife and probably destroyed my marriage, and he'd cost me my 2 sons. So I had a hard time feeling too bad. As he moaned, I realized that I could still hear the faint sound of southern rock from the land. There were no screams, no one calling out. No one had heard anything. I rolled back toward him and grabbed the injured right arm. He tried to swing at me, but jerking it away from him a couple of times brought screams and an end to his resistance. "You a hole. You already broke my arm. I give, damn you. You win. I'm going to need some help. Need to go to the hospital. In a little while, Bobby. Let's take care of some other business first. F you. I'll call for help myself." After I punched his already swelling elbow a couple of times, he thought better of that. I grabbed his right hand and pulled it away from his body. He didn't have the strength to stop me. I took his little finger and held it in my right hand, with my left leaning down to immobilize his arm. "I'm going to ask you a few questions, Bobby, and you're going to tell me the truth. F you, F you." I grabbed the little finger firmly and yanked it back until I heard the joint pop, and it just dangled at the end of his hand. His eyes opened wide, and he would have screamed if I hadn't hit him as hard as I could in his solar plexus, knocking his air out. I waited until I thought he was listening to me again. "Every time you lie, or I don't like your answer, I'm going to break another, Bobby, and when I run out of fingers, I'm going to start on toes, and then I'll find some other bones to work on. You understand me?" He finally nodded, then said softly, "You're on top, Lyle, so I'll tell you whatever you want. But there will come a day when I'm on top. And when I do, I think you're just going to vanish. Your body's going to wind up in the 20-mile swamp, and no one will ever know what happened to you. Maybe, but for right now, I want to know how long you've been F Diane." He was silent for a moment. "This time, or before? I already know you were with her when I met her. I mean, since we've been married." He smiled. I was tempted to break another finger, but I wanted to save them in case I really needed them. "About 4 years. 4 years. Yeah. How did it happen? How often?" There was a gloating smile, but it vanished, and from his tone I believed his words. "I was after her from the day after you married her. I tried everything, showed up at her work, just stopped by the house, played sad, tried to make her laugh. But she would never cheat on you. It drove me crazy. Then one day, about 4.5 years ago, she came up to me as I was coming out of a 7-Eleven. She wasn't smiling or flirty, but she asked me if I'd like to go somewhere for coffee. We didn't do anything that day, or for another 6 months, but she came after me. And then one day we wound up at my house and she went crazy on me. She asked me off, F me, made me take her, did every damn thing a woman could to you. She acted like she was starving for it. God, it was great. I tried to get 4 years worth of in one day, and we almost managed it." He tried to laugh, but choked and had to lean his head over and spit out blood and what looked like the white sliver of a tooth. He breathed slowly and then said, "I thought I had her back again. I thought she'd leave you. I came by your house the next day, and she slugged me when I tried to grab her. She screamed at me and swore she'd call the cops and have me arrested. I wanted to kill her. I was so mad. She was just a cheating, lying W. So I left. And I didn't see her for 3 months. I tried to stay away from her. Man, I was never so pissed in my life. And then one day, he spit again and laid his head back in the grass. She showed up at my place. Not a word, just walked in, dropped to her knees, unzipped me and s me. We went into the bedroom and didn't come out for 48 hours. She told me you'd taken the boys up to see your mom in Massachusetts and were going to be gone for a week. We F for 5 days off and on." He shook his head and looked up at me with what almost seemed like a friendly smile, a guy's smile in that ruin of a face. Damn, we're all stupid as hell when they wave in our faces. I thought I had her again, but as soon as you came back, she wouldn't give me the time of day. When I came over while you were there, she'd be friendly, but that was it. No Tucci, no F otherwise. He tried to move the hand I had immobilized, but could only wince when I put the tiniest bit of pressure on it. And that's the way it's been the last 4 years. Every 3 or 4 months she'll come around and we'll F our brains out for a day or two, and then she goes back to you, and it's as if it never happened. I tried to process what he'd told me. This wasn't any one-night stand. For years she'd been stabbing me in the back. enjoying a life with a guy who didn't have grease under his fingernails and who gave her a good life, and the only thing she had to do was put up with his boring F. He screamed again and bucked upwards, but I was able to hold him down until he stopped trembling. Sorry about that. I didn't even plan to break that one. I just lost it for a minute. I'm gonna kill you, Slow. I didn't want to know, but it was like pulling a scab off a hurting sore. I had to do it. I grabbed another finger, and he almost tried to hit me awkwardly before he realized I could just keep hurting him and he couldn't stop me. So she stayed with me for the money? Otherwise, she would have left me for you? Is that it? He moaned softly under his breath and then surprised me by laughing. You idiot. You don't get it, do you? What don't I get? She never needed your money. I drive a backhoe and I make almost as much as you do, according to what she told me in bed one time. And you know that Richard and Ricky have got it all set up to split all their money before they die. In a few years, she's gonna be able to buy and sell you. You're no prize money-wise. Then why? She loves you, you a hole. Why, I'll never know. She loves me, so she F you? Jesus H. Christ. You don't have a clue, do you? She gets more out of her than she's ever gotten from you. She told me once she could go to sleep while you're F her. That's how exciting you are. She tries to be faithful to you, but sooner or later she gets so horny she could scream, and she comes to me. And I make her scream. I used to tease her by calling her the screamer when we dated. She was the wildest woman, and you put her to sleep? He looked up at me then, and for the first time in my life, I was tempted to kill a man. I probably could have killed him. I settled for snapping another finger, pressed my upper arm into his throat to choke off his scream. When he stopped trying to scream, I eased off him and grabbed his pants zipper and unzipped him. Please, he moaned. Please what? I said, squeezing a little harder. It occurs to me, lover boy, that maybe I can't satisfy her like you can, but I can damn well make sure you never please her or any other woman again. You remember that guy whose wife cut his off years ago? He became a P-star after they sewed it back on. Well, I think I'm going to walk around the lake, throw it in the water, and with any luck some bass or turtle will swallow the damn thing. Yeah, I'd like that. Turn you into a woman. I enjoyed the look of fear on his face. For the first time, I'd really gotten through his shell. He believed I'd take his manhood. I didn't think he was the kind of man who could live with that. All at once I wanted to hurl. I was thinking about maiming a man because I couldn't please my ex-wife. He was only doing what a lot of guys would do. He wasn't betraying me. She was. I let him go, and he tried to roll away from me to protect his privates. I stood up and let his ruined arm and hand drop to the ground. I turned to walk away from him when he said, "You think I'm the bad guy. I'm the bastard that stole your wife and ruined your perfect marriage." I didn't look back, but it sounded like he was crying. "You're the one who ruined everything. She was going to marry me, you know? She was going to. Those 2 boys of yours would have been mine. She loved me, or she would have. We had been together since junior high. We were dynamite in bed. We were the same type of people. We would have been happy. And then you show up with your smart mouth and good looks and talking about things she'd never seen or imagined before. And you fooled her into thinking that you were the man for her." I looked back at him. "You stupid bastard. I'm the best thing that ever happened to her. You just never have been able to stand it that I took her away from you." "Yeah, guess you're right, smart guy. And see how happy it's made her and everybody else. She's tried to love you and live without it, and tried to stay in a marriage that's killing her. I lost the woman I loved and should have had. I got to sneak around to be with her and see her go home with you from these parties. And you'll always be a poor second to me in bed. Every time you go to F her for the rest of your life, you'll know she's dreaming of me. I don't think I could stand that. But like you might even enjoy it." She just stared at me. I guess he didn't want to admit that one pencil D could mess him up so bad, so he came up with that story about the bad bikers. Is that why? He told me everything, Diane, and I believe him. People usually don't lie when you're snapping their fingers. Oh God. For years. And he made you scream every time? Was he that much than me? Tears rolled down her face over the smudges. I couldn't believe a part of me hated her and a large part still loved her. No, baby. Maybe a little, but that's not it. It's hard to explain. It was that way from the first time we did it. No other man has ever affected me that way. It was like I got an electric shock. That's not it, but it's the closest I can come to explaining it. And I guess, maybe, if I had told you that I bored you to tears, that you didn't excite me the way he did, maybe we could have tried some different things, some toys, but how could I tell you, the man I loved, that another man made it wonderful and it was just okay with you? I knew you'd never be able to stand that. No man's ego could. So why didn't you leave me if he was that wonderful? He wasn't. It was the thing with him that was wonderful. I love you. I reached out and touched the side of her face, wiping a tear away. I know you're not in love with me, but I believe you love me and our marriage. But I left everything else unsaid as I stepped around her and started moving the luggage and laptop into our family Saturn. I'd be leaving her with the bigger Ford Escort for her and the kids. It took me 3 trips, but finally I was through, and I stepped back into the house. She didn't seem to have moved. She put her hands out as if to grab me, but left them hanging in the air. I don't want this, baby. I don't know how, but there's got to be some way we can fix this. Not really. I leaned forward to kiss her and tasted her tears. Our marriage is over. I want to see the boys and stay in their life, but there's no us anymore. Because you hate me. I looked into her glistening eyes. No, I love you, which is why this is so hard. But you can't breathe life into a corpse. We could go to counseling, CAS therapist, anything. We won't, because deep down you don't want to be married to me anymore. I don't think you believe we could ever make it work. How can you say that? Remember I said that silence is eloquent. Sometimes silence says more than words. I know you don't really want to save our marriage, because ever since I let you know I was leaving, you never said the 2 things that would have shown me that you still want me. They're the first things I would have said to you, but they never came out of your mouth. We stared at each other, and the question was clear in her eyes. You never said, "Don't go, please don't go." As it finally sank in on her, she dropped to her knees and buried her face in her hands. She was crying as I walked out the door.